For the first time in modern history, the Russian ruble has overtaken the US dollar in a key measure of global trade, dominance accounting for more than half of all export payments across every major international market. It is a shift that many in the West once deemed impossible, and yet it has arrived in 2025 with undeniable force. Beyond the raw numbers, this milestone signals the emergence of a new financial era, one shaped not in Washington or Brussels, but in Moscow. The ruble, once viewed as a domestically bound currency under the weight of unprecedented sanctions, is now positioned as a credible instrument for international settlement. From Asia and Africa to Latin America, and even segments of Europe and North America, the development raises an uncomfortable question for the global financial order. Are we witnessing the birth of a multipolar monetary system, or the opening chapter of a geopolitical power struggle where currencies themselves become weapons on the world stage? The numbers tell a story far larger than a quarterly fluctuation. They mark a structural shift in the way global trade is conducted. According to the latest data from the Central Bank of Russia, ruble-denominated export transactions reached 52.4% in May 2025, edging out April's 52%, and for the first time, surpassing the US dollar across every major trading region. In Oceania, an extraordinary 94.2% of Russian exports are now settled in rubles. The Caribbean stands at 92.1%, Africa at 84.6%, and even Europe, long considered a stronghold of the euro and the dollar, records 59.8%. Most strikingly, in North America, where the greenback has historically dominated without question, 51.9% of export payments to Russia are now conducted in rubles. This is not a coincidence, nor is it a short-term byproduct of sanctions. It is the culmination of a deliberate, multi-year de-dollarization strategy that Moscow set in motion following its exclusion from the SWIFT payment system in 2022. Cut off from the West's primary financial arteries, Russia responded not with retreat, but with reconstruction, building parallel payment channels, forging bilateral currency agreements, and offering incentives for companies and banks to transact in rubles. These measures have been reinforced by high-level political agreements with key partners in Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, effectively creating a web of financial corridors that bypass traditional Western infrastructure. The transformation is perhaps most visible in Russia's trade with China. Nearly 95% of transactions between the two Eurasian giants now use the ruble-yuan pair, reducing both countries' exposure to Western currency volatility and sanctions risk. Similar patterns are emerging with other major partners, India, Iran, Brazil, nations that see practical advantage in a multi-currency settlement system that lowers transaction costs, minimizes regulatory hurdles, and avoids the political leverage embedded in dollar-based finance. Economists like Professor Tatiana Belyanchikova of Plekhanov University point out that this shift reflects not just Russia's resilience, but also the willingness of many emerging economies to adopt alternatives to the dollar and euro. When the world's most widely used currency is deployed as a political tool, freezing reserves, blocking transactions, weaponizing access, it erodes its own neutrality and, over time, its appeal. The ruble's rise, in this context, is as much about the vacuum created by Washington's sanctions policy as it is about Moscow's strategic foresight. On the domestic front, the ruble's strength is supported by a disciplined monetary policy. The Central Bank of Russia has maintained high interest rates, tightened capital controls, and promoted ruble-based assets across the financial system. The results are measurable. In June 2025, domestic companies purchased just 1.6 trillion rubles worth of foreign currency, about $20.5 billion, the lowest monthly total since July 2024 and nearly half the 2024 average. For households, the appetite for foreign cash has dropped sharply as well. Net purchases of foreign currency by individuals fell to 77.9 billion rubles in June, down 32% from May and more than 50% below last year's figures. These are not signs of a population scrambling for hard currency to hedge against instability. Instead, they suggest growing confidence in the ruble's purchasing power, stability, and liquidity, both at home and abroad. The currency has appreciated for 7 consecutive months against the US dollar, briefly dipping below 75 rubles per USD in early July before settling around 77.89. This performance places the ruble among the most stable currencies in the Eurasian region in 2025. Despite ongoing geopolitical pressure, international observers are beginning to take notice. Analysts who once predicted a financial collapse in Russia now acknowledge that sanctions have, paradoxically, accelerated the country's transition toward monetary sovereignty. By turning necessity into strategy, Moscow has not only insulated itself from Western leverage, but also positioned the ruble as a viable component of an emerging multipolar currency, or one in which the dollar remains powerful, but no longer unchallenged. And therein lies the deeper geopolitical implication. If currencies are tools of influence, then the ruble's global footprint is no longer a footnote. It's an opening move in a broader contest over who sets the rules of international finance. As more countries diversify their reserves and payment systems, the monopoly of any single currency becomes less secure. The question now is whether the world is ready for a truly multi-currency trade environment, or whether this shift will trigger new forms of competition, realignment, and conflict in the global economic arena. In the end, the Russian ruble's ascent is not merely an economic success story. It is a strategic maneuver that redefines how power is measured in the 21st century. By securing over half of its global export payments in its own currency, Russia has demonstrated that financial sovereignty is not just possible under sanctions, but can be strengthened by them. This achievement undermines decades of Western dominance in global trade settlement, challenging the assumption that the US dollar's primacy is untouchable. The implications extend far beyond balance sheets. If a sanctioned nation can reorganize its trade flows, rewrite its payment systems, and persuade foreign partners to adopt its currency, then the entire architecture of the global financial order is open to renegotiation. For Washington and its allies, this raises uncomfortable questions. Can sanctions still serve as a decisive geopolitical weapon? Or have they, in this case, become the catalyst for the very change they sought to prevent? For Moscow, the message is clear. The ruble's new status is more than an economic milestone. It is a geopolitical tool, a signal to partners and rivals alike that Russia intends to play by its own rules in both finance and diplomacy. For the rest of the world, it is a reminder that the currency wars of the future may not be fought on trading floors alone, but in boardrooms, parliaments, and even on the battlefields where economic leverage shapes military strategy. As 2025 unfolds, one reality is becoming harder to deny. The era of a single currency dictating the pace and direction of global trade is fading. In its place, a fragmented yet more competitive landscape is emerging, one where the ruble, alongside other rising currencies, is no longer an outsider but a contender. Whether this leads to greater stability or deeper divisions will depend on how nations adapt to this new, multipolar financial reality. And so, the question remains, has the world just witnessed the start of a new chapter in monetary history, or the first move in a high-stakes geopolitical gamble? The answer, as always, will not be decided in headlines, but in the deals, alliances, and confrontations yet to come.